A police officer bought an abandoned house for just $10, expecting broken windows, maybe some rats, but what he found beneath the floorboards stopped him cold. A wounded German shepherd, ribs showing, eyes full of sorrow, and a heartbeat stronger than fear. She was pregnant, alone, and hiding in the shadows like she was guarding a secret no one dared speak of. But what Ethan didn't know was that this dog wasn't just seeking shelter. She was leading him to uncover a buried crime, 2 missing women, and a redemption no one saw coming. What happened next will restore your faith in grace and remind you that miracles sometimes have 4 legs and a scarred heart. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Let's see how far Grace's story can reach. Echo Ridge, Wyoming. Late autumn, 5:47 p.m. The light was fading fast, turning the sky over Echo Ridge into a bruised blend of lavender and coal. A thin fog curled above the treetops, clinging to the pines like whispered regrets. The wind didn't howl. It murmured, low and steady, threading through rusted fences and broken shutters. Ethan Cole pulled his old Ford F-150 to the edge of the cracked gravel driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled. 35 years old, lean with broad shoulders, Ethan had the build of a man used to physical labor, but worn thinner by the years. His hair, once dark brown, now carried streaks of ash along the sides, and his eyes, a deep, unreadable gray, often seemed locked somewhere behind the present moment. He had transferred from Denver PD 3 months ago, after a particularly brutal hostage situation left a boy dead and Ethan questioning everything. He didn't speak of it. Didn't need to. The way his jaw stayed tight and his gaze slid past crowds said enough. Here, in this quiet mountain town of Echo Ridge, population just under 4,000, he wasn't looking to make friends. He was looking for quiet, maybe even penance. The house he had bought sat at the edge of town, nestled against the encroaching forest like something the earth had begun to reclaim. For $10, it had been his. A legal loophole from a tax auction, and no one had even blinked. People said it was cursed. Others said it was just unlucky. He stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against frost-hardened weeds. The place looked worse up close. The roof sagged in 2 places. Ivy crept through broken window panes, and the porch leaned like an old man trying to stand through a storm. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply adjusted the strap of the duffel on his shoulder, unlocked the door, and stepped into the silence. Inside, the air was stale, the kind of cold that clung to the ribs. Cobwebs strung the corners, and dust motes danced in the last light spilling through the half-shattered windows. He dropped his bag in the hallway and moved room by room, flipping open old light switches out of habit, though the power had yet to be restored. The living room held a broken rocking chair and a burned-out fireplace. The kitchen had water stains across the ceiling and a trail of rodent droppings near the sink. None of it fazed him. But when he reached the basement door, something shifted. It wasn't the air, though it was colder there and thicker. It was something deeper, quieter, a tension he couldn't place. He opened the door slowly. The hinges groaned in protest. With a flashlight in one hand and the other resting near the grip of his service weapon, still holstered, Ethan descended. The basement was unfinished. Dirt floor, exposed beams. Old crates sat rotting in one corner, and a rusted water heater loomed in another. But then his beam of light caught something at the far end, a hunched figure in the dark. At first, he thought it was a pile of blankets. Then it moved. Ethan stilled. A pair of eyes caught the light, amber, wide, and hollow with exhaustion. The shape was unmistakable. A dog, but barely. It was emaciated, bones pressing through dull, matted fur. Her hind leg trembled as she tried to rise, but her body gave way again with a low, rasping whimper. She didn't growl, didn't bark. She simply watched him. Ethan crouched, slow and careful, lowering the flashlight. "It's okay," he said, voice barely above a whisper. He was trained for this, not just as an officer, but as someone who had seen creatures, both man and animal, on the edge of breaking. The dog was a German shepherd, or what was left of one, maybe 8, 9 years old. Her left ear was torn at the tip. Scars ran across her flank, and her ribs pushed against her skin like prison bars. But what caught Ethan most was her belly, swollen, round, and faintly twitching. She was pregnant and dying. "Jesus," he muttered. He set the flashlight down, took off his jacket, and inched forward. She didn't move, just closed her eyes for a moment, as if surrendering to whatever he was. Ethan wrapped her carefully, scooping her up in his arms. She weighed nothing. The bones of her spine pressed against his forearm. She didn't resist. Outside, the wind picked up. It carried the first scent of snow. Ethan placed the dog gently on the back seat of his truck, turned the heat up high, and began dialing the town's only vet clinic on speaker. It rang once, twice. A tired, female voice answered. Dr. Sarah Mendez, early 40s, was the town vet. Medium height, sharp features softened by years of working with strays, and eyes the color of pine wood. She had once worked in an urban shelter, but a car accident that left her with a permanent limp led her to choose quieter places. Her reputation in Echo Ridge was solid. Kind to animals, curt with humans, and zero tolerance for excuses. "I'm closed," she said. "It's Ethan Cole," he replied. "I just moved into the old Kane place." A pause. "And? I found a German shepherd in my basement. She's pregnant, starving, can't walk." Sarah exhaled. "Bring her in, back door, and don't expect me to make coffee." Ethan allowed a small smirk. "Didn't plan to." The clinic was dim when he arrived. Sarah limped to the back door, already pulling on gloves. She raised an eyebrow as Ethan gently lifted the dog from the truck. "Name?" she asked. "She doesn't have one," Ethan said. Then after a pause, "Grace. I'm calling her Grace." Sarah didn't question it, just nodded. They laid Grace on the examination table. Sarah worked in silence, checking vitals, pressing her sides, murmuring as she cleaned shallow wounds. "She's badly malnourished," Sarah muttered. "Puncture marks on her legs. Looks like she was tethered. Scars are old, but some are fresher than others, and pregnant. 4, maybe 5 pups." Grace whimpered softly as Sarah injected fluids. "She wouldn't have made it another day," she added. Ethan said nothing. He stood nearby, arms crossed, jaw tight. It was midnight when Ethan returned to the house alone. Grace would stay overnight. The wind had picked up. Leaves scuttled across the porch. Inside, the silence of the house had deepened. Not just empty, but hollow, like something waiting to echo back. Ethan lit a candle. He stood in the living room staring at the broken rocking chair, the soot in the fireplace, the cracks in the ceiling. The people in town had said the place was haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. Whispers said Marissa Kane had vanished from this house, that she had loved animals, that something awful had happened. No one ever proved it. And now, a dog had crawled back into the place where it all began. Ethan didn't believe in fate, but he did believe in patterns, and this one was starting to look like a knot he'd have to untangle. He looked down at his own hands, still dust-streaked from the basement, then to the floorboards near the stairs where Grace had first stared up at him, that look in her eyes. He closed his own, then whispered, almost to himself, "What happened in this house?" The morning after the rescue was gray, the kind of overcast that blurred the horizon and made time feel slower. Ethan stood at the front porch of the old house, steaming coffee in one hand, staring out at the mist slithering between the pine trees. A heavy silence hung in the air, almost too still. The night's memory of Grace, barely breathing, belly trembling with life, lingered in the back of his mind like a bruise that hadn't fully formed. Back inside, he strapped on his tool belt. The basement needed attention, not just for repairs, but for understanding. Something had settled there long before he arrived. Something unfinished, and it wasn't just Grace. He descended the creaking steps, flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other. The air felt thicker today, humid with the scent of rust and decay. As he moved toward the back wall, his boots scuffed over something metallic. He crouched, brushing away a layer of dirt. There, almost buried, was a thick iron chain, one end rusted through, the other still bolted to the floor. Ethan traced the line of the chain to the corner, where an old metal cage leaned on its side, its door twisted and partially melted. Inside the cage was a single, chewed-up rubber ball. His breath caught. It wasn't just the idea of confinement, it was how small the cage was, barely large enough for a full-grown German shepherd. It was made to hold, not to house. Leaning in further, he spotted a crumpled photo wedged beneath one of the bars. Carefully, he tugged it free. The image was water-damaged and faded, but clear enough. A young woman with windswept dark hair kneeling beside a German shepherd. Her smile was wide, luminous, and her hand rested gently on the dog's head grace. There was no mistaking those eyes. He turned the photo over. In smeared ink, it read, "Marissa and Gracie, Spring Picnic." So Grace had once had a name, a family, a moment of sunlight before all this. Ethan leaned against the wall, staring at the image. Something horrible had interrupted this picture. Something had stolen the warmth from both their lives. A sudden scratching broke the silence. Ethan stood quickly, head jerking toward the sound. It came from the far right corner of the basement, where the wooden wall paneling seemed newer than the rest. He approached it slowly. The boards didn't matchless rot, different nails. He raised the crowbar and pried one loose. Then another. Behind the wood was a second wall cement, and beyond that a rusted metal door barely visible beneath years of grime and mildew. He ran his gloved hand along the seams. It wasn't locked, just sealed shut. With a firm push, the door creaked open a few inches, releasing a breath of cold air that smelled of mold and something else, something old and animal. He paused. Something in his chest tightened. But before he could push it open fully, the front doorbell rang. Upstairs, he opened the door to find a woman standing there, holding a Tupperware container and a scowl. "Ethan Cole?" she asked flatly. He nodded, slightly taken aback. "Sarah said you wouldn't remember to eat." She was right. The woman handed him the container without ceremony. She was in her early 60s, tall and wiry with cropped silver hair and weathered skin. She wore a thick cardigan, dark jeans, and a pair of cracked garden boots. Her face had the stern permanence of someone who'd lived in the same town her whole life and wasn't impressed by much. "Name's Harlow. I live 2 doors down." He recognized the name from the deed records. "Thanks. You didn't have to." "I didn't," she said. "But Grace did. That dog saved you more than you know." He blinked. "You knew her?" "Everyone did. Grace belonged to Marissa Kane. Sweet girl. Took in strays like most folks collect stamps. Loved that dog more than herself. Then Victor Hale came along." Ethan's interest sharpened. "Victor Hale?" Mrs. Harlow's lips thinned. "Drifter. Smooth talker. Claimed he wanted to help Marissa start a rescue shelter. Brought in more dogs sick, scared things. Next thing we knew, the house was locked up. Marissa stopped showing up at the co-op. Grace vanished. And Victor? He just stayed." She looked past Ethan into the shadows of the hallway. "Until one day, he didn't." Ethan frowned. "What happened to Marissa?" "Disappeared. Sheriff chalked it up to heartbreak and a new start, but we all knew that girl wouldn't leave without her dogs, especially not Grace. You ask me, something bad went down in that house, but no one ever proved anything, and no one wanted to look too close." Ethan exhaled slowly, piecing the fragments together. Grace had survived this place, somehow, and she had come back, as if drawn to something unfinished. "I found a photo," he said quietly. "In the basement, Marissa and Grace. There's a sealed room down there. Looks like it hasn't been opened in years." Mrs. Harlow's eyes sharpened. "Then maybe it's time someone did." She turned and walked away without another word, her boots crunching over the gravel. Ethan returned to the basement, flashlight beam shaking just slightly. The metal door yawned open a few more inches under his pressure, groaning as it scraped the floor. Inside, the room was a small 10 by 12 feet, walls bare concrete. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its cord long since cut. But what caught his attention was the row of tiny cages lining one wall. Empty, rusted, still locked. Chains hung like vines. A rusted feeding trough sat in the corner, and the far wall was covered in scratch marks, deep, erratic, some low near the floor, some almost 5 feet up. Claw marks, years old. A flicker of movement behind him made him spin. Grace, now wearing a soft white bandage around her ribs, stood at the doorway, trembling. She had pushed the door open with her nose. Her eyes went wide as she saw the room. Her body sagged backward, tail tucked, head low. A low whimper vibrated from her throat. She didn't bark, didn't move forward, just stared. Ethan knelt down beside her, resting a hand gently on her back. "I know," he said, voice barely audible. "You've been here before." She shivered under his touch but didn't pull away. He looked back into the room. Whatever had happened here, Grace had survived it, but she hadn't forgotten, and neither would he. The sky cracked open in the middle of the night, sending forks of lightning across the black canopy above Echo Ridge. Rain poured in relentless sheets, drumming against the roof of Ethan Cole's creaking house like a warning call from the heavens. The town lay drowned in shadows. Roads slick and empty, the silence broken only by the rumble of distant thunder. Ethan lay on the living room couch, a blanket half draped over him, boots still on. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but the exhaustion from clearing the basement and that suffocating memory-choked room had caught up to him. Grace lay beside him, curled into a tight crescent, her breathing deep but never fully relaxed. A loud crack of thunder rattled the window panes, and in an instant, Grace jolted upright, ears perked, her body rigid. "What is it?" Ethan murmured, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. Then she growled, low, deep, a sound that didn't come from fear, but recognition. She bolted to the back door and started barking, loud and sharp, each bark carrying a sense of urgency that immediately sent adrenaline coursing through Ethan's chest. All right, I'm coming." He threw on his jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and followed her outside into the storm. The wind slapped at his face, rain immediately soaking through his collar. Grace bounded into the backyard, barking wildly now, circling near the old elm tree. Her front paws scratched furiously at the soaked ground near the base of the trunk. Ethan ran to her side, slipping slightly in the mud. He knelt down, pressing his flashlight to the earth. Something metal glinted faintly beneath the churned-up dirt. He began digging with his hands, pulling away clumps of wet soil until his fingers struck something hard. A rusted metal latch. It was a small safe buried deep beneath the tree roots. "Jesus. How did you—" Ethan whispered, glancing at Grace, who now stood still, staring at the safe like it had barked at her. It took a few solid tugs and a rock to break the latch. The safe creaked open slowly, revealing a bundle of water-sealed plastic sleeves and a small USB stick wrapped in cloth. Ethan held the flashlight in his mouth as he flipped through the contents documents, photos, and rows of microchip ID lists, each labeled with codes and names. Dozens of them. Some had red ink slashed through. The title on the top folder read, Project Orion, Live Export Inventory. His heart thudded. There were intake photos of dogs in filthy cages, close-ups of bleeding paws, infected eyes. Some of them bore tags metallic, with chip numbers matching the list. And at the bottom, a black-and-white printed photo of Victor Hale, slightly younger, standing beside a truck loaded with cages. In another sleeve, a hand-scrawled list of aliases, shipments, and vague location codes. One entry was circled several times. Marissa, transfer delayed, still problematic. The rain pounded harder. Ethan closed the safe and tucked the files into a plastic satchel he had slung over his shoulder before running back inside with Grace tight at his heel. Inside, dripping and breathless, Ethan laid everything out on the coffee table. Grace sat close, eyes never leaving the files. He didn't want to alert the entire sheriff's office, not yet, but he needed someone. Someone who wouldn't dismiss this as coincidence or say he'd been watching too many crime documentaries. That someone was Ana Morales. Deputy Ana Morales was not your typical small-town deputy. At 32, she was sharp, no nonsense, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen both the best and worst of people. She was tall, with olive skin, a strong jawline, and sharp dark eyes that scanned a room like she was memorizing escape routes. Her raven black hair was always tied in a low, functional ponytail. Ethan had only met her twice since transferring, but she had a way of listening that made you feel heard, and a quiet reputation around Echo Ridge as the kind of officer who asked the right questions even when nobody else wanted to hear the answers. He messaged her privately. "Need to show you something. Not over text. Confidential. Urgent." She replied within 5 minutes. "Coffee diner. 30-minute booth near the back." Ethan left Grace curled up in a blanket near the fireplace and made the short drive through the storm to the only diner open past midnight, Lucy's Corner. When he walked in, the bell jingled overhead. The place was dim, near empty, save for the waitress wiping down tables and Anna, who was already seated with 2 coffees, one steaming, the other untouched. She looked up as he slid into the booth. "You look like hell." "You should see the dog," he muttered, handing over the folder. She flipped it open, scanning silently. After 5 minutes of tense silence, she finally spoke, voice flat but deliberate. "These look real." "They are. Grace found the safe." Anna's eyebrow twitched. "Grace?" "The dog. German Shepherd. She was here before. She's the only witness I've got." She looked through the photos again. "Victor Hale. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. You know he used to work contracts in Mexico? DEA flagged him twice, but he slipped through rescues with no paperwork. Exported dogs for labs and fighting rings." "And Marissa?" Anna nodded. "The girl who disappeared? She called once, said something about dogs being recycled and chipped. But when patrol went to check, Victor said she had a breakdown and went to stay with relatives. No one followed up." Ethan's grip tightened around the coffee cup. "She didn't just leave," he said. "She was trying to expose this. She was the leak." Anna tapped the USB stick. "If this still works, I can pull what's on it, quietly." He nodded. "I don't want the sheriff involved. Not yet. There's too much history here. Someone let this rot happen." She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay, I'll do this off books. But Ethan, you better be sure. This could get real messy." He glanced out of the rain-slicked window. Somewhere out there, the people responsible still thought this place was forgotten. But Echo Ridge was remembering. Thanks to a wounded dog who refused to forget. It had been 4 days since Ethan handed the USB stick and Project Orion documents to Deputy Ana Morales. Since then, the town of Echo Ridge had grown quieter, as if holding its breath. The house on Alder Lane, once echoing only with the distant creaks of wind and rot, now pulsed with a different energy. Grace had started gaining weight again, her coat a little less dull, her steps more firm. She followed Ethan everywhere, room to room, even shadowing him while he brushed his teeth, as though each second apart was an unbearable risk. On that particular morning, the fog hadn't lifted. A soft mist clung to every branch and gutter as Ethan jogged down the gravel road to check the mailbox. He had started keeping his hand near the small revolver tucked behind his belt. He didn't expect trouble, but something about the safe being buried felt intentional, like someone hadn't expected it to be found. And now that it was, someone might be watching. As he walked back up the porch steps, Grace suddenly growled. Her stance froze ears back, tail rigid. Then she sprinted toward the edge of the woods behind the property. "Grace!" Ethan sprinted after her, mud slick beneath his boots. He cleared the fence just in time to see her lunging toward a dark figure darting through the brush. A man tall, broad, wearing a black jacket with no visible insignia, was trying to escape. Grace clamped down on his calf mid-stride, sending him tumbling into the dirt with a grunt. The man swung at her with something metal a wrench, and Grace yelped but didn't let go. Ethan yelled, pulled his weapon, but the man rolled and kicked free, limping fast into the trees. Grace snarled but obeyed Ethan's command to stay. He didn't follow. Too dangerous. Instead, he knelt beside her, brushing her side. "You okay?" Her breathing was fast, adrenaline burning in her bones. There was a shallow cut along her side, just under her ribs. He took her inside and cleaned the wound, hands trembling. Whoever that was, they weren't here to steal copper piping. They had come for silence. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove to the elementary school to speak with Sammy Parker, the same freckled 9-year-old who'd been handing out flyers at the farmer's market weeks earlier about his missing cat, Bobo. Sammy had red curly hair, a toothy grin with one front tooth missing, and an odd maturity in his gaze for a kid his age. He had become a familiar face around the shelter, always asking questions about dogs and drawing little sketches of animals he'd seen. Today, he wore an oversized yellow hoodie and sat cross-legged under the slide near the schoolyard, sketching a picture of a dog with huge ears and a scar under its eye. Ethan crouched beside him. "Hey, champ. Mind if I ask you something?" Sammy looked up, eyes squinting. "Is it about Grace?" Ethan blinked. "You know her name?" Sammy nodded. "She's in my dreams sometimes." Ethan tilted his head, smiling gently. "That's interesting. I actually wanted to ask you about something else. Your mom, Mrs. Parker, she volunteered at the shelter, right?" Sammy nodded again, slower this time. "She loved dogs. Said they were better than most people. Did she ever mention someone named Marissa Kane?" Sammy looked at him carefully. "She said Marissa saved a bunch of hurt animals. That she was really brave. One night Mama said she was going to find her. She never came back." Ethan's heart dropped. "How long ago?" "Last summer. I stayed with my aunt for a while, but Mama never came back." His voice was matter-of-fact, not out of lack of love, but because he'd had to learn not to hope. "She had a bracelet," Sammy added suddenly. "Silver with little dog bones on it. I made it with beads. She wore it everywhere." Ethan sat down beside him fully now, the ground still damp. "If I find anything, I'll let you know, I promise." Sammy nodded, looked back at his drawing, and said nothing more. That evening, Ethan returned to the house with more weight pressing behind his ribs. Grace followed him slowly this time, still favoring her right leg. He left the porch light off. Whoever was watching didn't need to know he was home. In the kitchen, he sifted through the documents again, now trying to find names he might have missed. One caught his eye. Karen Parker listed in a veterinarian intake report linked to the abandoned warehouse just outside Echo Ridge's limits. The location had been marked closed, transferred, but there was no record of where she went next. Grace walked to the front window and stood silently. Ethan joined her. Out beyond the field, on the edge of the woods, something reflected a flicker of light, a lens, a scope. He flicked the switch by the window. Floodlights exploded across the yard. No one, no sound. But Grace's growl rumbled again. They weren't alone anymore. The rain had returned to Echo Ridge. Not a thunderstorm, but a slow, relentless drizzle that dampened the earth and made every rooftop sigh with tired groans. It was nearly midnight when Ethan stirred from uneasy sleep, the soft scraping sounds from the hallway pulling him from his dreams. Grace had been restless all day, pacing the living room and sniffing corners like she was trying to remember something long forgotten. Tonight, she wasn't pacing. She was crying. Ethan rose from the couch, heart quickening as he followed the low, pained whimpers to the laundry room. He had made it into a quiet corner for her. Soft towels, old blankets, a basin of clean water. There she was, curled tight on her side, her breathing shallow but determined. Her eyes met his with a flicker of vulnerability he had never seen before. It was time. He dropped to his knees, stripped off his flannel shirt, and rolled up his sleeves. "I'm here, girl. I've got you." Grace, the once abandoned German shepherd who had faced worse than most humans ever would, gave a low grunt and pushed. The first puppy came quickly, small, slick, barely breathing. Ethan used the towel to rub it, to coax life into the fragile thing. Then the second came, then the third. By the time the sixth pup emerged, hours had passed and Ethan was soaked in sweat and relief. He watched as Grace, exhausted and trembling, licked each of her puppies clean, her nose nudging them into a warm pile against her belly. Their tiny whimpers, barely more than squeaks, filled the room like bells in a cathedral, delicate but sacred. Each one had a slightly different pattern, one with a white spot on its forehead, another with a bent tail. All had the same sable coat tinged with silver, and all were alive. Ethan sat back against the wall, wiping his face. His throat burned, and not from exhaustion. He hadn't cried in years. By morning, the rain had slowed, and Grace had fallen into a deep sleep, her pups still nursing. Ethan brewed a pot of coffee and stepped onto the porch. He needed air and answers. He called Anna Morales. She answered on the second ring. Did something happen? Grace had her puppies, 6, all alive. A beat of silence. Then her voice softened. That's good news. I need more than good news right now, Anna. I need truth. Anna sighed on the other end. Then meet me at the precinct. I found something you'll want to see. Anna. Morales was not the kind of officer who raised her voice. She was 34, medium height, Latina, with deep brown eyes that missed nothing and a precise manner of speech honed from years of watching people lie. Her hair was always pulled back tight, and her uniform looked freshly pressed even on the worst days. She slid a folder across the desk toward Ethan. It's not in the official system, she began, but I found it buried in an archived county audit. There was a payment trail on usual bank activity under the name of a now-defunct veterinary supply nonprofit. Ethan opened the folder. Wire transfers, cash deposits, all routing to one name, Victor Hale. What is this? Turns out Victor ran a network of unlicensed breeding facilities under different shell companies. One of them was listed on a transfer note from 3 years ago as Camp Red Hollow. No address, just coordinates. The place never appeared on any kennel registry or inspection list. And what was it? A compound, not a shelter, more like a containment site. Ethan's chest tightened. For what? Anna's jaw clenched. Abused dogs, injured dogs, stolen ones, kept just long enough to breed or train, and then… He didn't need her to finish. She slid another paper across the desk. But here's what hit me hard. One of the sign-in logs was partially recovered. Guess who's listed as a visitor 2 months before she vanished? He stared at the name. Karen Parker, Sammy's mother. Why would she go there? Ethan muttered. Same reason Marissa Kane might have. They thought they could help. That evening, back at the house, Ethan sat beside Grace, watching her sleep. Her body curled protectively around the pups, one tiny ear twitching at a dream. Her breathing had evened out. No longer labored, no longer afraid. The memory of the dark basement, the old chains, the buried documents. It all made sense now. Grace had once been inside Red Hollow. Maybe Marissa had helped her escape. Maybe Karen tried to follow and never made it out. Whatever the case, Grace wasn't just a witness. She was a survivor. And now, she was a mother. Ethan reached over and scratched behind her ear. We'll finish this, he whispered, for all of them. A small whine escaped one of the puppies. Grace nudged it gently closer. Life, Ethan thought, life in the darkest place. And maybe, just maybe, a way forward. The morning mist draped over Echo Ridge like a veil of secrets, muffling sound and softening the sharp edges of the trees. The forest to the north loomed deeper than any other, its pines tightly clustered as if guarding something too ancient and terrible to speak aloud. Ethan's boots pressed into the wet leaves as he followed the faint GPS signal blinking from his phone screen. Beside him, Grace padded silently, her ears twitching at every rustle. The signal came from one of the microchip IDs on the list Anna had found, the one belonging to a dog named Bellamy. A name that had appeared 3 times in Victor Hale's ledger, marked relocated. Most chips led to dead ends. This one was still active. Anna trailed behind them, her flashlight bobbing. She had changed into plain clothes for the trip: cargo pants, hiking boots, and a tan jacket zipped high against the cold. Her curly brown hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her usual polished demeanor was replaced with gritty determination. "Any idea what we're looking for?" she asked, ducking under a low branch. "Anything out of place," Ethan said. "And if Grace reacts again—" He stopped mid-sentence. Grace had frozen, nose in the air, body tensed. Without warning, she bolted left into the underbrush. Ethan's heart dropped. "Grace!" They sprinted after her, branches whipping their arms and legs, mud sucking at their shoes. After nearly 200 yards, the trees broke, and they stumbled into a clearing. There, nestled between dead pines and covered in camouflage tarps, stood a squat, crumbling structure. Weathered wooden planks, boarded windows. A rusted sign swung crooked on its nails. North Echo Animal Rescue, temporarily closed. Anna exhaled. "You've got to be kidding me." But Grace wasn't interested in signs. She was pawing frantically at the door, whining. Ethan approached, drew his sidearm. The doorknob turned freely. Inside, the air reeked of antiseptic, damp fur, and fear. The front room still had dusty pamphlets about adoption drives, faded portraits of smiling children and happy dogs on the wall. But beyond that, the place was wrong too quiet, too clean. They moved carefully, room by room. Cages lined the main hall, most of them empty. A few had shredded bedding and old dog bowls. Ethan's stomach clenched when he spotted claw marks deep in the wooden floors. "Looks abandoned," Anna whispered. "No," Ethan said. "It's scrubbed. That's different." Then Grace darted down a hallway to the right. She stopped in front of a metal door. Her entire body shook as she sniffed the frame, and then, suddenly, she let out a long, mournful sound, half bark, half sob. Ethan yanked the door open. Inside was a room lit only by a dangling, bare bulb. In one corner, on a cot barely large enough for one, sat Marissa Kane Thinner, paler and dirt-smudged, but unmistakable. Her brown hair was matted, her arms wrapped protectively around her knees. Beside her, on a second cot, was a woman Ethan had only seen in photos. Karen Parker Sammy's mother. Mid-40s, tall, thin, with sharp cheekbones, auburn hair now streaked gray and falling past her shoulders. She wore a torn flannel shirt over scrubs. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Grace let out a high-pitched whine and lunged forward. Marissa gasped as the dog crashed into her, burying her face in Marissa's chest, tail wagging so fast it blurred. She began to shake and whimper as Marissa clung to her, tears spilling silently down both their faces. Anna blinked. "Oh my God!" Karen slowly stood, eyes wide. You're not with them." Ethan holstered his weapon. "No, I'm Officer Ethan Cole. We're here to get you out." Marissa stroked Grace's head, her voice cracking. "I thought she was dead." "She thought the same of you," Ethan replied. Back in the precinct 2 hours later, Marissa and Karen sat wrapped in blankets, sipping hot tea. A paramedic named Lewis, an older man with sun-spotted hands and a gentle voice, checked their vitals. Grace remained curled at Marissa's feet, her pups safe back at the house with a trusted neighbor named Joni, an elderly widow who once ran the town's vet clinic and didn't blink when Ethan asked for a last-minute favor. In the dim-lit interrogation room, Anna gently closed the door behind her and leaned on the wall, notebook in hand. "Tell us what happened." Karen spoke first. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "We came here a year ago, separate times. I was looking for a missing pit bull from a cruelty case. Marissa was tracking Grace. I followed a lead that she'd been sold to a rescue center," Marissa added, one hand never leaving Grace's back. "When I got here, they said she had been adopted, offered to show me around." "And then?" Ethan asked. "They locked the doors, took our phones, said we were too kind to waste. They didn't hurt us, at least not physically. But they made us feed the dogs, clean the wounds, breed them, patch up the ones that fought. They used us as cover," Karen said bitterly. said we were part of a rescue team. The dogs trusted us more than they trusted the handlers. Anna looked shaken. How often were they there? Once every few weeks. Drop-offs, pickups. Victor came once. Tall, bald, expensive coat. He looked at Grace's photo and said, "That one was trouble." Grace growled low at the mention of his name. Later that night, Ethan sat alone outside the precinct. The stars above were blurred by cloud cover. The street lamps buzzed faintly in the distance. Grace sat beside him, her body warm against his leg. "You led us there," he murmured, brushing her fur. "You didn't forget." Grace didn't respond, but her tail thumped softly. He stared out toward the darkness beyond Echo Ridge. It was far from over. But 2 women had come home. A truth had clawed its way free from the ground. And in the arms of her rescuer, Grace had remembered who she was. Not just a victim, a witness, a survivor, a mother. The courthouse in Cedar Grove stood like a fortress of old morals in the middle of town. White pillars cracked from age, its stone steps polished by decades of feet chasing justice. The air that morning was heavy with anticipation. Camera crews buzzed around like flies, reporters with notepads and shoulder-mounted mics clustered near the entrance. But Ethan ignored them all. He walked ahead with measured steps, one hand on the leash. Grace walked beside him, steady and dignified, her sable and silver coat brushed and her posture noble, though the scar on her hind leg and the slight bend in her left ear betrayed her past. Behind them padded 6 fuzzy puppies, new life born from pain. They trotted like a procession, tiny paws clicking against marble tiles as if they too had a story to tell. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Locals sat shoulder to shoulder. Some whispered. Others stared in silence at the defendant seated near the front. Victor Hale. He was tall, clean-shaven, bald, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a smug expression that had been carved from granite. His steel blue eyes swept the room as if none of it mattered, but when Grace entered, his jaw visibly tightened. Marissa Kane sat on the witness bench. Her appearance had changed in the weeks since her rescue healthier, but still marked by the trauma. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled in her lap as she testified. "They kept us locked away. We were forced to care for the dogs they didn't want to handle themselves. The injured, the pregnant, the ones who fought too hard. I watched puppies die. I watched Grace nearly bleed to death after birthing in a cold metal cage." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't blink them away. Victor Hale walked in once every month, smiling. He said we were part of a cycle, that some pain was necessary for profit. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen Parker, Sammy's mother, spoke next. She was stronger than she looked, tall, lean, with the quiet fury of a woman who had survived in dignity. Her voice cracked only once when she mentioned the day she saw a crate packed with puppies bound for shipment. "They said the weak ones were disposable. I asked about the pit bull I was searching for. Victor told me she didn't make it. That's life." He laughed. The prosecution rested. The judge, a lean woman in her 60s named Honorable Evelyn Drake, silver hair in a tight bun and sharp spectacles perched on her nose, looked unimpressed as the defense mumbled objections and questions that lacked substance. Then, Anna Morales stepped forward. The deputy was in uniform, her badge polished, her expression grave. She presented evidence, wire transfers, microchip logs, satellite images of the compound. And then, lastly, she motioned toward Ethan. "It was Officer Cole and this dog Grace who uncovered the trail. Grace led us to the buried truth." With permission, Grace was led to the witness floor. The puppies were taken to a side room with a handler, but Grace stayed. The entire courtroom hushed. Victor sneered. "It's a dog. What can she say?" But Grace did speak, in a way only the honest could hear. She sat in front of Victor, unwavering. Her gaze locked onto him. There was no barking, no growling, just eyes. Eyes that had seen chains, blood, isolation, hope, betrayal. Eyes that bore the weight of creatures who couldn't stand in that courtroom for themselves. Victor looked away first. Silence followed. It wasn't just the silence of respect, it was the silence of understanding. The jury sat straighter. Judge Drake folded her hands and whispered, "Let the record show the witness, though nonverbal, has made a statement." Outside the courtroom, in a quieter waiting lounge, a small reunion took place. Sammy stood frozen when he saw his mother enter. He was only 10, but the fear of abandonment had etched lines too old for his age. When Karen knelt and opened her arms, he hesitated, then ran, sobbing into her chest. "I looked for you every day," he choked. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, holding him tight. "I never stopped thinking about you." Grace trotted up beside them, wagging gently. Sammy pulled back, wiping his face, then leaned forward to bury his face in her thick fur. "You found her," he said, looking up at Ethan. "She found us," Ethan replied softly. Later that day, after a recess, the judge returned with the verdict. Victor Hale was found guilty on all counts: animal cruelty, kidnapping, illegal transport of animals across state lines, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. The sentence would be announced the following week, but the gavel fell with a finality that shook the town to its bones. As people filed out of the courthouse, some in tears, some cheering, Ethan stood quietly near the doors with Anna. "You think it'll stick?" she asked. "It has to," he said. He looked over at Grace, who now lay peacefully with her puppies curled around her. Nearby, Marissa and Karen were speaking to a journalist. Sammy sat on a bench with a hot cocoa, wrapped in his mother's jacket, smiling for the first time in over a year. This wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning. The old house on the edge of Cedar Grove had once been a place of shadows rotting floorboards, peeling paint, echoes in the hallway that whispered of sorrow and secrets. But now, under the crisp light of spring, it stood tall again. The siding had been painted a soft sage green, accented with white trim. Wooden flower boxes brimmed with daisies and marigolds, tended to by small hands and weathered ones alike. A new wooden sign hung above the front porch, carved by hand and brushed with care. It read, "Grace House, a shelter for those who can't speak for themselves." Inside, the smell of fresh pine mingled with that of shampooed fur and warm bread. The once abandoned halls had been transformed into cozy rooms, lined with handmade dog beds, shelves stocked with food and medical supplies, and walls decorated with framed photographs of rescues and happy adoptions. Ethan Cole stood by the entryway, watching the crowd gather across the yard. He still wore his usual dark jacket and faded jeans, but the burden in his storm-gray eyes had lightened. The war veteran had found a new mission, one not of weapons or commands, but of kindness and healing. Beside him stood Marissa Kane, her shoulder-length brunette hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, wearing a white blouse tucked into denim overalls smudged with paw prints. She looked stronger now, eyes clearer, laughter returning in slow but steady waves. Karen Parker, Sammy's mother, bustled about near the food tables, directing volunteers with the authority of a woman who once ran community events before her disappearance. She was lean, with streaks of gray in her dark curls, and a voice that was both firm and warm. Her trauma had not broken her. It had refined her into something fiercer. Sammy, now visibly more confident, wore a little junior caretaker badge on his hoodie and chased one of Grace's pups through the tall grass. The pup, a stout, fluffy ball with a dark mask over his eyes, barked playfully as Sammy stumbled and fell laughing. And dear Grace lay on a new patch of sod in the center of the yard, eyes half closed beneath the dappled sun. Her 6 puppies, now 6 weeks old, tumbled over each other like wind-blown leaves. Her bent ear flicked lazily whenever one yipped too loud. She didn't have to guard any more. Today she rested, but her presence anchored everything. Near her paw sat a new plaque, driven into the ground on a polished metal stand. The inscription was simple, but it silenced every voice that paused to read it. This house was saved by a dog who never gave up. The ribbon-cutting ceremony began shortly after noon. Officer Anna Morales stood on a small stage, microphone in hand. Dressed in her tan deputy uniform, she smiled at the sea of familiar faces: townsfolk, police, volunteers, teachers, mechanics, children, retirees. All had come. "We often hear stories of heroes in uniform," she said, nodding toward Ethan and the others. "But today, we honor a hero in fur." She turned toward Grace, who looked up, wagged her tail once, then closed her eyes again as if to say, "I've done enough." Applause broke out, but it wasn't rowdy. It was heartfelt, long, and steady. People didn't just clap, they wiped their eyes, hugged each other. Even the mayor, Richard Boone, a plump, balding man in suspenders with a history of avoiding animals, stepped forward to present a donation check and stammered, "I was wrong. We were wrong. Thank you, Grace." Later, Ethan and Marissa gave tours of the newly built kennels in the back. They had named each hallway after the dogs they had rescued during the investigation: Hope Lane, Justice Run, Mercy Row. A soft-spoken girl named Leah, who had recently aged out of foster care, had been hired to help. She was 19, slight in build, with ash-blonde hair that covered one eye and a sleeve of sketch tattoos on one arm. She barely spoke at first, but Grace had taken to her instantly. "She doesn't like crowds," Ethan explained when someone asked why Leah hadn't joined the ceremony. "But she's got a gift. Dogs open up to her like she speaks their language." A week earlier, Leah had taken in a half-blind shepherd mix dumped by the river. She named him Bramble and taught him to follow her voice. Bramble now slept curled near the pantry, his ears twitching in time with the music playing on the radio. As the sun began to sink, casting long golden shadows over the lawn, the last of the visitors began to leave. They took home homemade dog biscuits and pamphlets on adoption and spay and neuter programs. Some stayed to help clean. Others lingered just to watch Grace. Sammy tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Can we keep one?" he asked, pointing to the smallest pup runt of the litter with a crooked tail and an endearing yawn. "That one's got fight," Ethan smiled. "If Grace agrees, he's yours." Grace opened one eye. The runt bounded over to her, nuzzled her muzzle. She licked him once, and that was that. By evening, lanterns had been lit around the yard. Marissa lit a candle in the old kitchen, placing it beside a faded photo of Grace's first known litter before captivity, before pain. She whispered something and smiled. Outside, Ethan sat on the porch steps, a mug of black coffee in his hands. Grace lay beside him, tail tapping slowly. "We did it," he murmured. Grace didn't respond. But she didn't need to. The home that had once held suffering now held healing. A new chapter had begun, not just for the dogs, but for everyone who had walked through hell and come out the other side with scars that could finally breathe in the open air. This wasn't just a rescue. This was Grace's legacy. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with lightning or choirs from the heavens. They arrive on 4 tired legs, with one bent ear and eyes that have seen too much but still choose love. Grace wasn't just a dog. She was a reminder that even the broken can heal, that even the forgotten can save, and that hope often comes wrapped in fur and silence. Through Ethan's pain, Marissa's captivity, and Sammy's longing, God planted a seed, and it grew into a home called Grace House. In a world that often turns cold and cruel, this story reminds us that God works through the unlikely, the overlooked, and the abandoned. When we open our hearts, just like Ethan did, He sends us the ones we need, even if they arrive with scars. If this story touched your heart, let it be more than just a story. Comment Amen below. If you believe God still sends miracles through His creatures, pray for those still searching for healing, for home, for hope. Share this video with someone who loves dogs, believes in second chances, or needs to be reminded they're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of redemption and faith. May God bless every soul watching this video. You never know, the next miracle might be waiting right outside your door.